Hello to everyone logged in for this evening's program. We're going to get started in 5 minutes at the top of the hour. Hello and good evening, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us for tonight's training webinar, Developing Social Intelligence to Strengthen Your Social Interactions and Relationships. In other words, strengthening your networking skills and working with people in small groups or big groups. Before we get started this evening, I always like to give a huge shout out to Justin Gray and all the amazing team members at 99 The Unagency for two reasons. The first reason is to bring all of you, the members of 99, such wonderful, diverse programs that help you with skill building, mindset, um, technical, non-technical skills, all the things needed, yes, for the entertainment industry, but also things that apply in regular life. So I'm grateful to Justin Gray for them doing that for all of you. I'm personally grateful to 99 The Unagency for bringing me in as an instructor and spending quality time with all of you teaching very, very valuable human interaction skills, ways to cultivate confidence and mindset, and all those types of things. Glad to be with you all tonight. For those of you that have been in rooms with me before, welcome back. Thank you so much for coming back to my programs. I really appreciate you. For those that have not been in programs with me before and you're new or newer to being in one of my programs or even knowing who I am, welcome. My name is Rob Hinds. I have a company called Raise Your Lid Consulting, and I unlock and unleash the potential in people and in their businesses, and I do this in three ways. The first way is through professional or personal coaching services. The second way is through developmental training programs, which what you're experiencing tonight and through 99 is what I call my micro learning programs, where within an hour or less, I share with you some great information, some good tips, some skills that you could build on, some things you could implement right away. I also do larger programs to where they're more in depth and have exercises around them and that sort of thing. I do that for small to medium sized businesses. And then the third thing I do are educational speaking events where I get out in the public and I do either keynote speeches or things wrapped around human skills. So that gives you a general scope of who I am. At the end of this presentation, I'll be sharing my contact information, my social channels. So once we finish the program, if you feel like you want to reach out, you want to send me a DM or an email or something continuing to communicate with me, I absolutely welcome that. And I'd be happy to answer any further questions you have after the program is over. As far as questions for this evening, here's how it'll work. I'm going to go through my entire presentation and give you all the information, the tips, the tricks, the keys, the cautions, all of the things. If you have a question during any part of this program, please put it into the Q&A or chat, and I make sure I have time at the end of every presentation to answer all of your questions. Now, here's what I ask. First and foremost, ask a question that's relevant with tonight's topic. I know I personally cover a lot of different topics for 99. I do many different programs for 99. Tonight is on social intelligence. So be sure your questions are all wrapped around the program we're doing this evening. The next thing I ask is that be very clear in what you're asking. Um, it doesn't need to be a long story or a lot of background or anything like that. However, be clear in what you're asking. And if you are referencing a specific part of the presentation, add that into your question, and that'll help me give you the most complete answer I can. So let's get into this evening. So the intention for this program is how we cultivate closer connections with people. The first thing we're going to do is we're going to fully define and understand social intelligence. Many of you have heard of emotional intelligence. In fact, I do a program for 99 on emotional intelligence, and that is a more popular buzzword out there. More people seem to know about emotional intelligence. I'll briefly go through it just so you have a good idea of what it is without getting into too much detail. However, what people normally don't hear about is social intelligence. And we're going to define it, the understanding of it, give you the importance of it. Then we're going to talk about the different levels of awareness for social intelligence, indications of low levels of social intelligence and high levels of social intelligence and what that looks like. Then, what I'm also going to do for you is I'm going to share some skills and some tips to develop higher levels of social intelligence. Now, I do want to be clear at the beginning. Your level of social intelligence can go up or down. Now, it may be in certain situations, you may have a high level of social intelligence. In other situations, you may have a low level. Also, with certain people in your life, whether it's through work, whether it's personal, family, whatever that is, sometimes people will draw out a low level of social intelligence with you, depending on how they're behaving with you, or you could deliver a high level of social intelligence when you're more consistent all the way around, no matter who's around. So sometimes your environment, sometimes the people, that will determine where your level is. However, the goal of not only this evening, but everything you do going forward is continue to raise your level of social intelligence. Because when you do that, and you do that at a consistent rate and a high level, you create stronger connections. That's the idea of it. All right. Before we get into social intelligence and everything around that, it's helpful to have at least a medium to high level of emotional intelligence. If you have a low level of emotional intelligence, you're not consistent with it, social intelligence is much harder to cultivate because it starts with you. So, emotional intelligence is the ability to recognize, understand, and manage your own emotions as well as so it's not just about you, as well as recognizing and understanding the emotions of others. Now, that doesn't mean you have to deal with the emotions of others. That doesn't mean you have to agree with their emotions, agree with the way they're behaving. It's simply understanding the emotions of others. So, those are the two parts of emotional intelligence that come through. When we look at this simple chart around emotional intelligence, there's both personal competence, which is where we start, and then there's social competence. When we talk about personal competence, the very, very first thing is self awareness. So, self awareness, just to keep it quick and simple for everybody, is the ability to recognize emotions as you have them and maybe even name them, maybe even call them out, but definitely noticing the emotions that you're having. That's the first part of emotional intelligence. The second part is what we consider self management or self regulation. So, self awareness is being aware of your emotions. Self management is how those emotions are coming out of you. So, if you happen to feel angry and then you lash out at somebody, you scream at them, you yell at them, that would be a low level of self management or self regulation. A higher level would look like if you're feeling angry, you take a breath or you take a couple minutes or you say, I just need time to digest this. That's a better self management thing to do. And it's healthier all the way around. Once we have self awareness and self management, under control, or at least at a consistent high level. Now we move to social awareness. Now, social awareness is being aware of the emotions and feelings in others, minus judgment. So, without being judgmental, just being aware of how others are thinking, feeling, behaving. It's basically empathy and paying attention to others. Where self awareness is being aware of your own emotions, social awareness is being aware of others' emotions. And once you gain a higher level of empathy or understanding of those emotions, now you can move into the fourth quadrant of emotional intelligence, which is relationship management. Basically, this is where you have a good understanding and awareness of your own emotions. You regulate those emotions well. In other words, how they come out of you. You're aware of others, you're conscious of other people, and you are understanding that they're at where they're at in the moment. So now you could start to build relationships around it. After relationship management, that's now where we move into social intelligence. So emotional intelligence is what we would call the first big step. Social intelligence is once all those things are at a higher level, the more ability you have to build stronger relationships with people. So, social intelligence is a person's ability to understand and manage interpersonal relationships or relationships in general. So, having all that understanding, all that awareness going on, being aware of yourself, being aware of other people, being kind, being understanding even if you don't agree. Those all play now into social intelligence. In other words, being conscious, considerate, and adaptable with people. Now, some people are conscious of other people, but they still act out. They don't have high emotional regulation. We notice that there are a lot of people that are self absorbed. Really, every one of us in the room is absorbed to some point or some level. We all worry about ourselves, and we should. We should be concerned with ourselves. Some people take being self-absorbed to a different level to now it affects other people negatively. And that's when people become inconsiderate of other people. So when you're considerate of others, chances are you have a higher level of social intelligence. Then the last piece of this is, are you adaptable? Can you adapt to different situations? Can you adapt with people of varying emotions? Or is your emotional intelligence maybe not as at a high of a level as it could be? And you're one of those people that say, well, I just can't. I just can't deal with them. I just can't. If that's the case, chances are your level of social intelligence is either low or non-existent, and your emotional intelligence is probably fairly low. It's not a judgment on anybody. That's just the truth of how the brain, the body all work together and how social connection works with people. All right. Now we're going to dig a little bit deeper into social intelligence. Now that we got the definitions out there, um, my hope is that there's a better understanding for all of you around it. So let's talk about some key elements of people that have a higher level of social intelligence. First of all, they're either situational or environmentally aware. What this means is if there's a situation, they are able to adapt to make the situation as good as possible, as positive as possible, um, looking out for yourself and looking out for others, making sure that everything in those situations can go as well as possible, even if it's a terrible tragedy or whatever that looks like. Just understanding the situation is a big deal. People with high levels of social intelligence have a high level of situational awareness. Then we talk about environmental awareness. And the environmental awareness is exactly that, the environment around you. If you hang out with very negative people, chances are that's the vibe that's going through. If you hang out with people that are really driven, fast-paced, fast-moving, that's the environment you're in. Now, many times, especially in the entertainment industry, and there are other industries, but any industry that deals with high levels of influence, high levels of ego, high levels of emotion, with any of those, environmental awareness could be mixed. You could have a mix in the crowd, and I'm sure you've been either at an event or a photo shoot or anything like that, where there's a lot of people around, and as you read the room, you notice, some people are really good and positive, some are down in the dumps, some might not be talkative, some might be over talkative. So the environment you're in is also conducive of it. When we look at things from a personal aspect, you're at a birthday party or an anniversary party, a wedding, anything like that, the environment there is most likely different than when you're in a professional environment. You're at a conference. You might work for a big company or a corporation. You might be in the office somewhere, or you might be in a retail store somewhere. So any of those things, situational and environmental awareness, are very important. People with high levels of social intelligence have high levels of situational and environmental awareness. Then there's genuine curiosity about others. People with high levels of social intelligence, they ask a lot of questions. And they're not just asking questions to check a box or asking questions for general information. They're genuinely curious about others, and they either want to learn or even just get to know people better. So people with high levels of social intelligence, they have general and genuine curiosity about others. They're also very good listeners. If you happen to know anybody, and it may be some of you in the room, if there are any of you in the room that are really good listeners, that's an indication of a high level of social intelligence. You're able to take information in from people, you let them talk, you let them finish their sentences, um, you ask further questions, which goes back to curiosity, but your effective listening skills are a way to determine a high level of social intelligence. Then we get down to your conversation skills, or what some consider verbal fluency. Now, can you have a good conversation with people? Can you have a balanced conversation with people? There may be some of you in the room, or you definitely know somebody that they barely talk at all during conversations. On the other side of that, it may be some of you in the room, or definitely people you know that do all the talking in conversation. When we talk about a high level of social intelligence, you have very good, very balanced, very harmonized conversation skills. You know when to do the talking, you also know when to do the listening. Next, we talk about respecting boundaries. Now, normally when we think about boundaries, we think about ourselves, and yes, rightfully so. All of us should establish very strong boundaries, and it's best that we enforce those boundaries in an appropriate way. What I find in my level of work with my coaching clients is if they have really loose boundaries or if they have really rigid boundaries, chances are their level of social intelligence isn't as high as it could be, because they not only don't have boundaries themselves, most likely they're not respecting the boundaries of others. And just so you're aware, one of the programs that I do for 99 The Unagency is establishing and understanding boundaries. So if boundaries are something you feel you need help with, you may want to tune into that program when it comes up on your calendar. Okay, the next part of this is having a high level of social awareness, which goes back to emotional intelligence. We have self-awareness, we have self-management or self-regulation, then we have social awareness, or in other words, empathy. We have an understanding of people. So people with high levels of empathy, chances are it's good that they would have a high level of social intelligence. Remembering specifics or details. When you truly listen to people and you pay attention and you are aware and you remember things, just think about somebody that you may have met one or two times and you happen to tell them your birthday or your anniversary. And the next time you see them, they actually remember that. Or if you said you were going on a trip and you know you haven't seen somebody and the next time they see you, they say, "Hey, by the way, how was your trip?" When you remember specifics and details about people, that's not only a high level of social intelligence, but it creates a really strong connection with people. When you focus on building trust and building real trust with people, building trust takes time. Now, all of you know, I'm sure there's been people in your life that you trusted and they did something to wrong you, and it's really hard to build trust back. Trust is very difficult to build. It's completely easy to lose. All it takes is one lie, one mistake, one thing you've done wrong. Now, if the other person isn't understanding or have any levels of empathy, that may lose your trust in them forever. For people that have higher levels of social intelligence and higher levels of empathy, they may be willing to give you another chance or reestablish boundaries with you and see how you react to those things. Building trust is big. Then the last element we're going to talk about with people of high level of social intelligence is things like timing. Is it the right place? Is it the right time? Is it the right environment? So being fully aware of yourself and others, that's when timing is really, really important. And I'll give you an example. Let's say with any of you in the room, we're having a disagreement. However, we happen to be at a function to where it's very calm, very serene, even fun or energetic. That's probably not the time to debate with somebody or argue with somebody. So timing plays a really big role. You decide if it's something that could be dealt with really quickly, you might say, "Hey, could I pull you aside a second and just talk to you about this real quick?" If it's something that's a little more deep and involved, you may ask the person to schedule time with you or, can we talk about this tomorrow morning? So the place and the time and the environment, you know, you definitely wouldn't want to be openly speaking, maybe negatively or not in a positive way about somebody when you're at their funeral. Just a quick example on that. So place, time, and environment, all very important when it comes to timing. Those are some of the key elements around high levels of social intelligence. Now we're going to talk about low levels of social intelligence. In other words, these are the red flags or behaviors that contribute to low levels of social intelligence. If somebody is a conversation monopolizer, they do all the talking, they don't let anybody get in a word in, they have to be the highlight of every conversation, they have to have the last word, they have to do the most talking. Total red flag for low social intelligence. Interrupting. Interrupting is a massive indication of low social intelligence. Now, here's something that's interesting. Sometimes we say, oh, you know what? I'm so sorry. I don't mean to interrupt, but you do anyway. So you still interrupted. That's still a low level of social intelligence. Just because you noted it doesn't make it okay. Now, there are some times to where we do need to interrupt, we do need to interject. Um, there are times for that. However, if interrupting is a continuous, consistent thing, that's what brings it down into the low level of social intelligence. If you have what I call mismatched energy levels, I'm sure there are some of you in the room that are at high energy all the time. There might be some of you in the room that are massively mellow at all times. And then I'm sure there's many of you that vary or are somewhere in the middle. When I talk about mismatched energy levels, this is where if you come in and you're at a 10, you're on fire, you're moving quick, you're moving fast, this and that, and you notice that the group or the room or the people you're dealing with aren't quite at that level, there's a mismatch. So are you able to adapt your level? And I call it plus or minus, and I'll explain that a little bit later. But when you have mismatched energy levels, that's a red flag or a behavior of low social intelligence. Oof, this is a big one for the entertainment industry because whether you want to be famous, whether you want to be influential, all of the above, whatever that looks like, whether you want to be highly regarded, excessive bragging or being overbearing with self promotion are massive red flags of low levels of social intelligence. Now, I completely understand those of us in the entertainment industry, we do need to promote ourselves. We do need to talk about ourselves. The key word here is excessive. If you're constantly bragging, if you're constantly promoting yourself, at some point, people are going to look at that and they're going to become disengaged or disenchanted with it. Which brings to the next thing, people that are one-uppers. And I know all of you in the room know what I mean by this. One-upping. So you say, hey, I had this great day. I just signed a contract for this. And a one-upper would say, oh, that's great, but I actually did something better. Or every time, and even if it's a negative situation, oh, you know what? My mom's really sick. And the other person, in a weird way, one-ups that and said, oh, yeah, you know what, though? My mom just passed away. So basically, one-upping is disregarding the other person to show them that you've either done something better or done something worse, depending on the context of the situation. And there's also those people, I call it tagging on. Let's say you're in a meeting or you're in a group and you tell a story, and there are people that constantly say, oh, yeah, and I wanted to add on to that, or I wanted to tag on to that. We actually see this a lot in the corporate world or in a lot of work environments where people always want to display their importance. So even when somebody else brings up an idea or something like that, they want to add on to show that, they're also at that level or even above that level. So one-upping and tagging on, massive red flags. Constantly speaking aggressively. Now, there are times, yes, you may need to be aggressive. More than likely, you would need to be assertive. So I'll quickly explain that. On one extreme, there's aggressiveness, just going right after it, right after people. There are the people that are like, well, I'm just strong. Well, you could be strong, but you don't have to be a jerk. I'm talking about speaking aggressively, like constantly over asserting yourself into situations. That's on one extreme. The other extreme is being very passive or passive aggressive, either not saying anything or cowering away or making sarcastic comments. So on one side, there's aggressiveness. On the other side, there's passive or passive aggressive. In the middle is assertiveness. Now, sometimes you may be assertive more on the aggressive side, or you may be assertive more on the passive side. However, the harmony for having a high level of social intelligence is being assertive in the middle. Speaking too aggressively on a consistent basis is a red flag for low social intelligence. Then there's the people, we all know them. And again, maybe there's some people in the room making insensitive, inappropriate comments, passive aggressive remarks, um, you know, gaslighting. We hear the term gaslighting. Gaslighting is a very popular term, getting somebody to think that they're crazy or doubt their reality, that sort of thing. So any of those things are red flags for low social intelligence. Then there's oversharing. There's also lack of sharing. Let's start with oversharing because most people are more in tune with that. Have you ever met somebody and immediately they tell you everything about their life, all their surgeries, their 5 divorces, all these people that did them wrong, or even on the bragging side, all their accolades, I have an MBA, I do this, I do that. So they overshare. Oversharing is a red flag for low social intelligence. So is lack of sharing or undersharing. If you want to make closer connections with others, at some point, you would need to add into the conversation. Even if you're a shy person, if you're introverted, those types of things, you could start small. But people who are really hidden in lack of sharing, it almost seems a little bit devious or unfair to the other person or other people. So again, having a harmony in the middle of the amount of sharing that you do. Then another red flag or behavior of social intelligence could be things like nervousness, fidgeting. This could also be a personality trait. For people that might be a little more introverted or socially awkward, any of those things, that could contribute to the low level of social intelligence. And it's these some of these things aren't necessarily bad things, but they're things to be aware of. If there's a lot of nervousness and fidgeting, you would also need to be aware of how that might be affecting others and making others feel. All right. Those were the red flags or behaviors of low social intelligence. Now I'm going to talk about some tips. Some tips when networking or when you're in group settings, whether it's small groups, large groups, it could even be one-on-one. Social intelligence is universal. It's across the board. So tips when networking or in group settings, here's some good ideas. We start with the basics. I'm really not going to go deep into these. Things like a good handshake, good eye contact, not uncomfortable eye contact. So if you're constantly looking away and you can't look people in the eyes, that's not a good thing. However, if you stare people down and you never look away from your gaze and it becomes really strong and intimidating, that's not good either. So what I call is appropriate eye contact. And then there's appropriate greeting. You know, obviously, if you know somebody and you've got good rapport with them, you may run up and give a hug. For those people that are really comfortable with others, you may call them by a nickname or call them a name, that sort of thing. But an appropriate greeting is also being aware of others to where sometimes people aren't huggers. Maybe they don't want to be hugged. So reading the situation, engaging it, how you greet people, you know, hey may be okay with some people. Hey may be fairly offensive to some people. So really gauging your greetings and where you're at is a good idea. Avoiding traditional or really boring type questions, especially when you meet people for the first time. One of the worst questions you could ask somebody, and there's a lot of data, there's a lot of science around this. one of the most uncomfortable questions for everybody involved is when somebody says, "Oh, what do you do?" It's uncomfortable for the person asking. It's more uncomfortable for the person that now has to figure out, what do I say to that? What is the right thing to say? So, really avoiding general or boring type questions or questions that would make people uncomfortable. You would want to look in, and for those of you that take my other programs, when I do programs on communication, I'll share with you some of those tips. If you use open-ended, mindful questions, that's a great way to improve your networking skills or in group settings. When you ask really purposeful questions, it shows the other people that you care. It also shows the other people that you're listening, that you're interested. At the end of the day, and again, especially in the entertainment industry, we want people interested in us. So, one of the things, and it's at the bottom of this slide, but you would ask yourself, am I interested and am I interesting? That's a really good question to ask yourself when you're trying to figure out where your level of social intelligence is. Um, Using positive emotion driving verbiage. So those are things like, "Oh, that's fantastic. Can you tell me more about that story?" Or "Can you tell me more?" Really, when you want to engage well with others, everybody likes to talk about themselves. The greatest thing you could do is let them, to a certain extent, of course. Now, if they're monopolizing and over talking, that's a red flag on their part. But as far as you go, when you have positive emotion driving language, that helps you connect stronger with other people. I had talked earlier about mismatch energy levels, and this is where I talk about the plus or minus, and I said I would explain that. So if somebody comes in at a 2, they've got really low levels of energy, maybe low levels of self-esteem or confidence or anything like that. But if they come in at a 2 at a really low level, chances are you don't want to come in at an 8 or a 9. However, you also don't want to come in at a 2. You don't want to come in at that low level. So what you would do is, I call it energy plus. You would come in at a 3 or a 4. That way you're not overwhelming them being in an 8. However, you're stepping it up a little bit to make the interaction a little more positive and receptive and that sort of thing. Same thing with energy level minus. If somebody comes in hot and heavy at a 10, if you match that at 10, nobody's going to get anything done, accomplished, a word in, anything like that. Now, of course, if you're both at a 10 right at the beginning and it's somebody you haven't seen in a long time, you're both screaming or squawking or hugging each other, that sort of thing, that's okay. But as you go on, when somebody's at a real high level, you might want to match minus 1 or 2 levels. So if they come in at a 10, maybe you'll dial it down a little bit to an 8 and kind of bring the temperature of that conversation down, or bring that energy down just a little bit so it's not everybody on fire all at once. The next important tip that I could give you is start to read cues in people. Most likely, all of you have a really good level of being perceptive. You know when somebody's happy, sad, angry, disappointed, that sort of thing. Now, some people do hold their cards close to the vest, and you may not be able to read them quite well. However, for the most part, if you're really paying attention to people, you can read the cues. So if you notice, you have to talk to somebody about a certain thing. If you notice that they might be distracted or their mind might be on something else, it would be good to note that, notice it, and maybe even bring it up. When you read the cues of other people, and there's so much science and different tips and tricks and things around it, but when you're able to adjust after noticing cues, it's really important. I'll give you an example. When I speak in public and I'm doing a presentation or a class, I'm really, really reading the group and paying attention to the group and making sure that if I notice that they're at a certain energy level, I plus minus it depending on the context. Or if I notice maybe I'm giving too much information, I'm going to dial back a little bit. That's an adjustment that I make, especially when I'm on stage or when I'm in front of groups. Now, with all of you on this webinar, I can't see you, can't hear you. I can't tell. Maybe I put many of you asleep, hopefully not. But the information I'm giving you this evening, if it is too much information, that's something I would definitely learn from. But reading all cues is important. This next one is really a skill that you can cultivate, and it's hard for a lot of people. When do I end a conversation appropriately without upsetting or offending the other person? This is really tough, and I'll just give you a quick tip around it. You could say things along the lines of, you know what? I've really enjoyed talking to you. I do need to leave. Let's talk at some other point. You could do that. Now, only if it's the truth. If you never want to talk to them again, I wouldn't encourage you to say that. Or you could do something like, you know what? I only have 2 more minutes to speak with you, then I need to get on to something else. Can we please wrap up the conversation? So there are multiple different ways to end a conversation appropriately. It's definitely a skill that most people can and they need to build. Um, if it happens to be, we'll talk about what I call the talking to listening ratio. So when you think about a conversation in a group or with somebody, you think, how much talking am I doing versus how much listening am I doing? Or how much am I asking questions? And you take that and you try to establish a really good harmony to where if you're talking is at a really high rate, let's say you're doing 95% of the talking, chances are you would need to dial that down and talk a little bit less or listen a little bit more. Now, if the other person isn't participating, it makes that a little more difficult. On the other end, if you're only sitting there and listening and you like being the fly on the wall and that sort of thing, again, there's nothing wrong with that. However, when you want to engage more with people and you want to become more interesting, at some point you do need to participate a little more. So again, we try to find the harmony in those different things. Harmonizing your talking to listening ratio is a really good skill to build. If you happen to not be interested, and I know, everybody in this room has run into that person that where you're like, oh man, I wish they would just shut up, or I wish they would just finish, please, or I wish they would stop talking. Or it's just, you know what? I find this conversation really boring. This is also another skill, just like ending a conversation appropriately, it falls hand in hand. Even if you're not interested, show some compassion for them, show that you appreciated them sharing, and then either politely move on to another conversation with them, change the subject, or you may need to end the conversation and walk away. Any of that's okay as long as it's done appropriately. I always say this about communication. If you're clear with people, if you're direct with people, and if you're kind to people, if you're clear, direct, and kind, chances are you have a really good chance of being a great communicator. If you do two of the three, you have the chance to be a good communicator. If you do one of the three, you probably have challenges being a good communicator. If you're not clear, nor direct, nor kind in your communication, chances are you have a lot of problems making really, really deep connections with people. But all of those are skills that can be built. In this last bullet point I already went through, ask yourself, am I interested and involved and engaged in what's going on? And am I interesting? Or am I reading the cues and I could tell that I'm absolutely boring everybody or people don't have any interest in what I'm saying? That's possible. So, those are some tips when networking. At the end of the day, it is all about mutual respect in conversation. Here's here's something that I learned a long time ago and I felt it's really, really relevant to pay forward. Do yourself a favor if you're really wanting to make stronger connection with people, listen with the same passion in which you would want to be heard. In other words, if you really want people to listen to you and gravitate to you and like you and regard you and respect you, listen with that same thing in mind. Listen with that capacity. At the end of the day, by improving your social interactions, you build better community. You actually learn better. Um, there, I'm sure all of you have heard the comment, I'm self-made. If anybody has done anything of any significance, nobody is self-made. There are always other people, other resources, or other influences involved if you really have done anything of significance. Like if somebody said, I'm a self-made millionaire, absolutely not true. There were people or things in their life that helped them get to where they're at. So by improving your social interactions, you help build the things that help you build yourself. All right. Here's just some quick tips and actions to improve your social intelligence. It's really not about what you learn. So you could have taken all this information tonight. If you leave and do nothing about it or don't try any of these things, you're not going to improve. You won't get anywhere. So really, I always say this, education is good. Applied education is way better, way more efficient, way more successful. So, first and foremost, develop your strengths. The things you do really well, keep doing them, keep building them, keep making them better. The social intelligence thing isn't just about taking the low level intelligence things and improving them. It's also taking your strong points and building on them. Be honestly aware of your areas of improvement. If any of those red flags resonated with you directly, first of all, good for you for being honest with yourself. However, now take the steps. Take the steps to improve. I encourage people, don't take all of this information and think you're going to implement it tomorrow. Take small steps, put in the reps. So take small steps and take those small steps and be consistent. That's putting in the reps. Once you've done that, you start to create small wins. As you build small wins, you start to build momentum. Once that momentum goes, you get better at what you're doing. You become more aware. You become more effective. You become more influential. You become more trustworthy. All of that plays together. Then what you want to do is you want to evaluate your results. As you're taking these steps and as you're doing these things, you figure out what's working, what's not working. And then with what's not working, you either do differently, figure out a different way, a different approach, or you delete it. If you're doing something really well, you evaluate that and say, what can I do better? Being adaptable and being able to adjust is a big part of this. And then what I say is rinse and repeat. Once you find a really good formula, especially for social intelligence, continue to do it, continue to build on it. And what you'll notice is you'll immediately influence those around you. if you no longer get caught up in gossip, if you are more understanding of people, if you become a better listener, people are going to notice the differences in you. Now, they'll also notice the bad differences too. If you continue to do poor things or negative things or things that affect people negatively, they remember that too. When you're really improving and you're really growing and people notice that, they're more apt to jump on board. So those are some of the actions to improve social intelligence. This isn't a destination. It's not like at some point you go, "Hey, I've gotten there. I'm I'm at the highest level of social intelligence." That's not how it works. Like I said at the beginning, it could adapt, it could ebb and flow depending on the people involved, depending on the environment, depending on your background, depending on your mindset, depending on your mood. There could be multiple things. However, if you just know that it's a continuous journey of growth and a continuous journey of improvement, you'll continue to build toward higher levels of both emotional and social intelligence. All right. Now, what I'm going to do, I'm going to look through the questions and I'll answer all the questions that are in there. So if you have any last minute questions, now's the time to put them into the Q&A or chat. While you do that, what I've done for you, a gift for you for being with me this evening, if you scan this QR code, I've actually created an outline of the things we discussed this evening, and you're able to download it, keep it, share it, let people know where you shared it from, but by all means, use it to the best of your ability. And I'm going to quickly look at the questions while everybody scans the QR code. So let's see. Well, first of all, some really nice comments. Thank you. Thank you, everybody, for the kind comments. Okay. Alicia. And Alicia, you've been in rooms with me several times. I'm grateful to have you back. So glad to have you back. So let's see. Alicia asks, is loneliness a part of prosperity? Okay, let's see. Environment area I am located in at the moment is not ideal to my usually relocated to Houston from Wisconsin. Okay, so is loneliness a part of prosperity? The answer would be yes, Alicia. Loneliness can be part of prosperity only if you're using that loneliness to grow yourself, to build yourself, to improve yourself. If you're using loneliness as an excuse or a way out, or you're using loneliness in a negative way and it's diminishing from you, it wouldn't apply or be a part of prosperity. It would only be loneliness would only be a part of prosperity if you're learning and growing in that loneliness, whether you're reading books, watching podcasts, whatever the course is, as long as there's growth within that loneliness, yes, it would attribute to prosperity. If the loneliness is in the negative context, it wouldn't. Great question. I'm glad you asked that. Thank you. Okay. Okay, Alicia, you had another question. Thank you again. Is it not empathetic to only want to deal with professional, not criminals? No. Well, empathy is the understanding of others. If you're dealing with criminals, you would understand that they're criminals, and chances are you would want to part ways or be separate from them or have distance from them. So it's it's not, only wanting to deal with professional people. That's a choice. However, you could still have empathy for somebody that's a criminal. You just don't need to deal with them. And that's where things like strong boundaries come into play. So great question. Thank you. Okay. Kelvin. Thank you, Kelvin. And you've been in rooms with me before. I appreciate having you back. This is quite a long paragraph, so I'm going to see if I could pick out a question within the paragraph. Let me take a look. How do you come into a office room and feel in control, but not be too controlling? Excellent. So with that question, this is an indication of confidence, Calvin. If you don't have to be the most talkative in the room, however, you're comfortable with yourself, you're confident in who you are and what you bring to the table. When the opportunity arises, you add value. If the opportunity doesn't create itself, you may be able to create that. You don't feel like you need to one up people or talk over people or interrupt people. That's when you walk into what you considered an office room and feel in control. That's all with you. You don't have to be controlling in order to exude confidence. Great question. Okay. Okay, Kelvin, you had a second part to your question. How to shift boredom into fun at the work office when everyone is feeling down and unbalanced. Excellent. So this is where the energy level match plus or minus comes into play for you, Calvin. If you notice the room's a little bit down and a little bit drabby, you don't want to come in running and gunning with all high energy things. However, you can come in 2 or 3 levels above where that room is and start to engage people in a little more fun conversation or do your best to raise the level of where they're currently feeling at the moment. So that mismatch energy level, the match energy level plus minus is something you'd want to look into when it comes to that. Great question. Okay. Kai Brown. Kai, you've been in many rooms with me also. I always appreciate you having you here. Let's see what Kai asks this evening. What if you're in a situation where somebody likes you and everybody you know takes their side and is trying to push you into talking to the person and gaslight you into dating, trying to make us feel bad for the other person's emotions? How can we try to avoid that? Kai, the answer to this is clear, direct, and kind communication with them. Let them know how that's making you feel. Let them know what you plan to do and let them know what you expect of them going forward. So if that's something you're wanting to avoid, you would let them know, I appreciate what all of you are doing. However, I'm not interested in doing that. I'm asking all of you to respect that. And going forward, I'm not interested in having this conversation anymore. Clear, direct, and kind. Okay. Okay, Kai, you asked a follow-up to my previous question. Who's the one with the high and low SI and EI? Well, it depends on how it's handled. If you handle it along the example I gave you, that would be an indication of high social intelligence. If you turn away or you avoid or you get upset with them or anything like that, that would be a low level of emotional and social intelligence. So you can only control how you act and react. How others act and react isn't up to you. Focus on yourself in those situations. Okay, let's see. Okay, Anthony, thank you for being with us this evening. Anthony says, I am one to need improvement. If need be, to get where I need to go, I'm ready to take them steps. You are here for them adjustments and help, right? Well, yes, I'm here to deliver this information to you this evening. If you have any further questions for me, you're able to DM or ask me. If you're interested in my coaching services, I will absolutely do a consultation with you and see if we're a right fit for each other. Thank you, Anthony. And I hope this program helped you this evening. Okay, let's see. Okay, Shelley asks, and Shelley, thank you for joining us this evening. Shelley asks, I appreciate this information. How do you navigate someone else who monopolizes the conversation? Now, we talked about people who are serial interrupters. You don't want to be an interrupter, but sometimes if somebody's monopolizing the conversation, you would need to step in and say the truth, say what's on your mind in an appropriate way, clear, direct, and kind. So, Shelley, somebody who's monopolizing the conversation, if you want to get your words in, you may say, you know what? I am going to interrupt you here. I have something to say. And I would like to say that without being interrupted and being heard. Or if they're monopolizing the conversation and you want to exit, you would say, okay, thank you for sharing all of that information. I'm going to go. See you later. So at some point, sometimes with people who monopolize conversations, you do need to interject at some point or just sit there and bear it, which I don't recommend. I hope that helps, Shelley. Great question. Okay. Let's see. Okay, so Ocean asks, and Ocean, thank you for being with us this evening. What do you recommend in terms of healing errors I made years ago? Great question. Here's what I'll say. The past is the past. However, the past also teaches us lessons. If you're asking what do you recommend in terms of healing errors I made years ago, if it affected other people, I would recommend making amends. If it's something that has just affected you, I would ask you to learn the lesson from whatever those mistakes were and not repeat them. Great question. Thank you so much. Okay, let's see. Okay, Margaret asks, hi, Rob, I'm retiring from a 30-year career in nursing. Wow, Margaret, congratulations. Outstanding. 30 years in the nursing industry. That's great. Taking classes for 9-9. Is it okay if I just want to disconnect from all the people except family and friends for literally the whole month of February? Is that healthy? Okay. If you're disconnecting for betterment, chances are the answer is yes. That would be healthy. That's a good thing. If you're running from things or running from people or running from difficult situations, that wouldn't be healthy. So, for example, if you just want to take a break from, it sounds like take a break from maybe 9-9 for the month of February and just enjoy family and friends, that's absolutely healthy. However, if you're running from things because you're scared or fearful of something, or you're hiding from something, you don't want to deal with something directly, that wouldn't be healthy. However, it seems that this break that you're looking to take seems very healthy to me. And congratulations again, Margaret, on a great 30-year career and moving forward in the entertainment industry. I wish you all the best. That's outstanding. Okay. I know we're a little over time. I wanted to make sure I got through questions. Okay. Adrian, thank you for being with us. Adrian asks, how can you develop social intelligence skills? Well, the entire program I gave you gives you the good awareness. All the tips I gave you at the end, that's how you start working on those skills. Determine where you're at high levels of social intelligence, determine where you're at low levels. Where you're at high levels, continue to build those skills, keep doing what you're doing. For the things that are low level, those are the things you really want to pay attention to and start to take small steps to better those. For example, if you're somebody who one ups people, you'll want to minimize or completely stop one-upping people. So taking all those things into consideration. Thank you for that, Adrian. Okay. Okay, Christopher asks, first workshop, so I have attended, so I don't have any expectations. Is setting expectations a benefit or a detriment? Christopher, great question and welcome. Um, Thank you for having me as your first person, for your first workshop that you attended. I hope you enjoyed it. So, setting expectations is normally a benefit unless you're setting expectations that are either harmful to others or not going to move yourself forward. Setting expectations is a great thing. So generally, yes, unless they're negative or they negatively impact others. Thank you for that question and welcome aboard. Okay, with casting directors, and this is Daniel. Daniel asks, Daniel, thank you for being with us. With casting directors, let's see, where two casting directors like to see your attitude energy? Should you be gun ho or a little more subdued? Okay, I think I understand this question. All right, Daniel. So with this, when you go into casting directors, try to read the room and see where their energy level is. And depending on what you're auditioning for or what you're doing there, it may require a higher or low level of intensity. However, normally you can't miss being in the middle. So we talked about 10 being really high energy, really gung ho, as you put it. And then we talked about super low, just very little low energy. It normally never hurts to start out in the middle at a 5 and go from there. And as you read the room, you could plus or minus that energy level. Good question. Okay, Ocean asks, what are a few safe ways to withdraw oneself from someone exhibiting red flags? A few safe ways are if you feel like you could appropriately talk to the person about the challenge you're having, that would be great. Um, Things like ghosting and all those cowardly acts and stuff like that, not a good idea. There are sometimes we do need to walk away, especially if the situation is unsafe. However, if somebody's exhibiting red flags and you don't feel it's appropriate for you to point those out or bring those up, politely exit the conversation. And I shared with you some examples this evening on how to do that. Say, you know what? Thank you so much for all the information. Thanks for the talk. I need to leave. See you later. So thank you for that, Ocean. Okay. Adrian asks, when working, how can you develop a strong relationship with those who hold a higher position? With those who hold a higher position, this is a really great question, Adrian. What you want to do is you want to become in their regard. And here's some good ways to do it. You figure out how can you be of value to them while you're also trying to establish yourself. So if it happens to be somebody in a higher position, you might say, hey, so and so, you know what? I was wondering if there's anything additional I could do for you or any ways I could help you because I really want to learn from you and I want to grow. So a lot of times offering to help, um, offering to be more involved, offering, you know, it could even be advice. When somebody's in a higher position and you're trying to build a strong relationship for them, that's one way. The other way is completely kick ass at what you're doing. Show them by your actions how valuable you are so you don't need to use words to tell them how valuable you are. Now, if they happen not to recognize that, which does happen, then you would need to have the conversation with them saying, listen, I'd really like to be of more value. What are some things I could do? So, a lot of times asking them questions. Thank you for that, Adrian. I hope that helped. Great question. Okay. Leo, thank you for being with us. Leo asks, oh, where are you located, Rob? I'm actually located in the Chicagoland area. So I'm about 45 minutes out of the city of Chicago. Thank you for that. Okay. Okay, Leslie, thank you for being with us. Leslie asks, how do you get somebody from talking over you all the time? This is where you would need to interrupt at some point and let them know exactly how you feel. I notice you continue to talk over me. I'm giving you respect by listening to you. I'm asking you to do the same thing. When I'm talking, please let me finish. And once I'm finished, I'll be happy to hear you out. Hopefully, that's a good example for you, Leslie. Great question. Okay, that is all the questions for the evening. Thank you so much for that. I promised all of you I would share my information with you, so here it is. If you want to scan the QR code in the corner, that takes you to my bio site, which you could look at my website. You could download contact information. You could look at my bio, any of those types of things. Or you could just take a screenshot of this. And these are the networks where you can find me. It's been absolutely my pleasure to be with you all of this evening. I hope you all have a great rest of your week. And please come back to any other program that I'm doing for 9-9 or even attend programs. If you need personal and professional coaching, I'm available. So reach out, let me know how you're doing. I hope this was helpful and wonderful for all of you. Thank you all so much. I appreciate you. Have a good evening, everybody.